To understand the scale of the Indian independence movement, you have to look at the figures standing next to Mahatma Gandhi. Walking closely alongside him during significant protests was Sarojini Naidu, a woman who treated the British colonial administration as a direct political opponent. Her rise through the movement was definitive. By 1925, she was presiding as the first Indian woman president of the Indian National Congress, commanding a seat at the highest levels of the anti-colonial struggle. Yet 20 years before she was a political icon, she was a literary one. In 1905, she released The Golden Threshold, a book of English poetry that earned her the title Nightingale of India. This creates a central question. Why would a woman dedicated to ending British rule choose to build her legacy using the exact language and poetic traditions of the empire she was fighting to remove? Naidu was a child prodigy from Hyderabad. Her father pushed her toward mathematics, but she spent her time writing poetry instead. At the time, the British education system had a specific goal for colonial students. They expected that mastering English would lead to assimilation, that students like Naidu would simply adopt Western values and mimic Western culture. Naidu took a different approach. She viewed the English language as a translingual space, a way to infiltrate the Western literary world and force it to listen to an Indian voice on its own terms. She set out to prove that Indian identity didn't have to be translated away to be taken seriously. To see how she planned to do that, we have to look at the specific mechanics of the poems themselves. Naidu's strategy relied on total technical mastery. She adopted the rigid frameworks of English verse, but she hollowed them out, removing the Western subjects to leave a blank mathematical structure. Take her poem Palanquin Bearers. She wrote it in a napistic tetrameter, a meter defined by 4 sets of 3 syllables, where 2 unstressed beats are followed by a stressed one. Dum, dum. It's a strict Western rhythm, but Naidu synchronized it perfectly with the swaying, physical motion of Indian palanquin bearers. The math of the English poem became the literal footsteps of an Indian laborer. She filled these imported structures with specific Indian scenes, replacing typical subjects of British poetry with the reality of laborers she saw on her own streets. By wrapping local Indian life in elite Western poetic math, she forced London's literary critics to acknowledge the Indian subject as high art. While the English critics praised her, they largely misunderstood her intent. Arthur Symons, a prominent critic of the era, viewed her work through a patronizing Orientalist lens. Symons described her work as an agony of sensation, framing Naidu as an overly sensitive subject who was simply reacting to the world around her. But Symons was ignoring a deep tradition of Indian aesthetic theory called rasa. Rasa isn't about uncontrolled emotion. It's the highly calculated practice of using specific artistic choices to evoke a precise emotional state in the audience. When Naidu wrote about snake charmers or Coromandel fishers, she was deploying rasa to depict the sensuality of Indian life. It was a technical execution, not an emotional outburst. What the West viewed as exotic novelty was actually a calculated application of Indian decadence on a global stage. These literary choices served a communitarian function. Naidu deliberately used these verses to synthesize the fragmented identities of a colonized India into a single shared public record. In poems like Indian Weavers, she chronicled the universal cycle of life, birth, youth, and death, through the eyes of common laborers, making the everyday work of the Indian people the center of her art. The Golden Threshold cataloged the bustling diversity of her home city, from Hindu devotees to Muslim royalty. She treated every disparate group as an essential part of a single, larger whole. By gathering these diverse identities into one celebrated collection, Naidu provided a unified measure of the Indian nation before it officially existed. This literary work provided her with a public platform. By the time she became a nationalist leader, she was a celebrated cultural voice who defined the nation's identity in English. Her poems gave her the shared vocabulary she needed to rally the masses in the streets. For Naidu, poetry and politics were never separate. Her ability to master the English language gave her the soft power to assert Indian sovereignty in a way the British couldn't ignore. Her career demonstrates that before a nation can be physically liberated, its culture must be claimed. Naidu achieved this by taking the colonizer's tongue and using it to sing her own song.